Okay guys, so before we get into this video, I want to say really quickly, there will be a preset pack that you can buy, which is, I think, a pack of 6. We're just working on it at the moment, so we'll have all the details in the description down below. If you want to buy the pack, it is a Kim Kardashian preset pack. It will have the one that we did in this video, and we'll also have some extra ones in there as well. If you want to buy that, the information is down below in the description. All you need to do is send us a direct message on Instagram. That's at Sebastian_JWB or at Matthew_GKB. And then just contact us on there and we will email you the presets, and it's payable through PayPal. But I hope you enjoy this video, guys. I hope it's really useful. And if you want to get the preset pack, there are more ones we are selling as well. Just check the links down below. Enjoy the video.
Hey guys, and welcome back to another colour grading tutorial on our channel. Today I wanted to do something slightly different to what I've usually done. Now usually we pick an Instagrammer that is very heavily based on arty photography. Today you can see we are going to be basing this video around Kim Kardashian. Now this is completely different to what we usually do on the channel. I just wanted to try out something new, and a lot of you guys have been asking me about how we could possibly colour grade like the famous Kim Kardashian. Now obviously if you scroll through her Instagram feed, you can see it's got a very uniform feel. Some of them have got this vintage look going on, but a lot of it is quite desaturated. So for example, if I click on I don't know, this image here, you can see the greeny blues are very desaturated and there's a lot of whites in the background. So the first thing I will say before I get into the colour grading tutorial is we wanted to try and develop this channel. We wanted to try and get to know you guys a lot more. So I will say we are hosting a giveaway, probably coming up in the next video, or depending on when this video comes out, it will be in the previous video. So make sure you go check that video out. When the video comes out, I will leave its link in this description so you can go check it out. So that being said, it would be great if you guys could go follow us on Instagram. My Instagram is Sebastian_JWB, and my brother's Instagram is Matthew_GKB. So it'd be great if you guys could go follow us over there. We really want to kind of start a get to know each other kind of thing. So if you guys have any ideas for videos on how we could do that, we're trying to bring out a vlogging behind the scenes sort of thing so we can kind of personalise this a little bit more. Just let us know down below in the comments. Also don't forget you can follow us on Twitter as well. Okay, so let's get back to what we are doing today. Now before I get into the actual colour grading tutorial, I will say I haven't got a photo specifically in the style of Kim Kardashian. You'll see, so for example, this photo here, it's taken with very muted colours. I've got a photo that's very similar, but it's in a natural environment. It's not in a city environment like the majority of her photos. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be picking an example, say for example this one here, which might work for us, and we're going to be going through how we can take our image to look something like this. Okay, so this is the image we are working with today. You may have seen it in a few of our past colour grades. The reason I haven't got a new one is because the weather currently at the moment in the United Kingdom is absolutely shocking, and I haven't had time to go and shoot. I've also had exams on and everything, so if you guys have been wondering where we've been, it's because we've had exams. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do with this photo is you want to come up to here and you want to crop your image to 4:5 ratio. You want to make sure your image is in portrait mode, as are all of Kim Kardashian's photos on her Instagram. So once you've done that, just select done, and we are basically good to go with starting the colour grade. Okay, so the first thing we're going to be looking at is the basics panel. Now if we go back onto her page, you can see everything is very bright. She doesn't have much contrast. It's incredibly flat based images. So we're going to do that. We're going to first of all drag up the shadows. Now the amount that you drag up the shadows on your image is going to be drastically different to this one, because you can see this image is incredibly dark. So in my case I've dragged it up to plus 100%. I'm then going to go on to exposure and drag that up to about 2.1, and you can see now it's incredibly overblown in the highlights, so we are going to get the highlights, and we're going to drag those down to about -40, -50, something around there. Actually, in fact, we're going to put it down to -75. Now the next thing we're going to do is go into the contrast slider, and we're going to drag the contrast down to -52. Now already you can see we're beginning to get this flat sort of decontrasted type photo. I'm going to try and find one that we can base it off a little bit more. Let's say this one, for example. So the next thing we are going to work with is we're going to come down to the whites and blacks. In this case, I'm going to take down the whites, and I'm also going to lift up the blacks. Usually what I'll do is I'll increase the whites and I'll take down the blacks. The reason for that is it adds a little bit of contrast and helps with the vibrance of the image. In this case, we don't want to introduce too much contrast. As you can see, everything is very decontrasted in her photos. So that's why we are taking down the whites and increasing the blacks. We're going to leave the temperature and tint for later, and we're going to come back to that if we need to. Next thing is clarity. Really, I don't think we're going to need anything to be changed on clarity. If anything, we're going to take it down ever so slightly to probably -5, around there. Now the next thing is vibrance and saturation. We can either take the vibrance down and the saturation down, but that could look a bit strange. I usually like to take the vibrance up to about +10 and then just drag the saturation down. Okay, so if you press the / key on your keyboard, you can see the before and after of how the image is progressing. So evidently this has changed massively just because we've brightened up the image. Okay, so if we come down to the tone curve, that's the next thing we're going to do. If we come back onto Kim Kardashian's page, so on a lot of her photos she does use fade. So say for example here, you can see the shadows are faded out. On some of them as well, like this one, she doesn't use as much, but it does help us get that softer look. So we're going to put a point in the middle. Then we're going to come down to the bottom here, we're going to put a point here, we're also going to put a point here, and we're going to follow a typical sort of S-curve where we lift up the mid-tone highlights and we drop down the shadows there. Not introducing too much contrast, but then we're also going to just lift up the shadows just to add a little bit of fade, and we'll probably drop off the highlights about that much as well. Now this hasn't been a particularly dramatic tone curve like some of our previous edits, but you can see if I turn it off and on again, it does add a little bit more interest to the photo. Okay, so once we close the tone curve slider, now this is where the real magic begins to happen, is on the HSL slider. Firstly, we're going to come down to saturation. Now on Kim Kardashian's photos, you can see the main colours that are in saturation are obviously skin tones and also the greens. If I come and show you another example, so this is another good example. You've got sort of smoky greeny blues, and then everything else is incredibly desaturated, but her skin tones are correct. Same going here, you can see everything's desaturated, obviously apart from her. Now that adds to sort of make it look like she is the subject of the photo. It really does help. So we're going to try and do that in this photo here. Okay, so come up to your saturation slider, leave the reds and oranges for a minute, come on to the greens, and we're going to drop the greens down to about -98, -92. We are really decreasing the colours in those greens. The yellows we're going to decrease as well to about -60. We're not going to do these too much because otherwise we're just going to get a completely black and white image in the background. That's not the look we're going for. We are going for those desaturated greens. So already you can see that we're beginning to get this colour going on here in the ferns. Obviously the shirt is ever so slightly different colour, but we're going to work on that in a minute. The next thing we want to do is drop the aquas and blues, and all we're really doing is we're just selecting every colour that's not red and orange, which is the primary main colour in all of her photos, and we are desaturating every other colour. So again, with the purples and magentas, you want to drop those down. I mean, you could even drop them off to -100 if you wanted to. So really what we're doing is dropping off the saturation massively. We're going to have a very desaturated image here. Now the next thing you want to do is we can always tweak these a little bit more. We can always come in and reduce the yellows a bit more or increase the saturation, but we're going to leave those there for the time being. Now as for the reds and oranges, you can either increase the saturation on the reds and oranges to make it look like you have a better saturation on the subject of the image, which in this case I think should work quite well, because that's the focus of the image. I want the eye to be drawn to that part of the image. You can see if I were to desaturate that, the whole image, your eye isn't drawn towards anything. So in this case, we are in fact going to bring the orange saturation up to about +3 and the red saturation up to about +30. Now moving on to hues, we really want to leave the reds and oranges alone, because you can see if I decrease the oranges, I make it more pink. If I increase them, he looks a bit like Shrek. So we're just going to leave those in the middle. We don't want to mess around with the reds and oranges simply because that is the skin tones. We want to keep the skin tones as natural as possible. Now as for the yellows, greens and aquas, we want to adjust these colours to look like these blues here. Now, as for the yellow slider, it's basically the yellows and greens is the main focus of this image. Obviously, it's taken in a forest. So if we get the yellow slider and we drag it to the right, you can see we're beginning to add, it looks ever so slightly more blue. You can see those greens are changing slightly. The green slider, if you drag it all the way to the right, it makes the greens a sort of more turquoise. If you drag it all the way to the left, it makes them a more browny, orangey colour. So in this case, we are going to drag the greens up to about +13. Not too crazy, but we are actually adjusting these colours ever so slightly. Okay, so the aquas and blues, this is where the shirt is really going to change, in theory. Okay, the aquas aren't doing anything. The blues, presumably his shirt will adjust. Okay, so you can see slightly, if I drag it all the way to the right, The shirt goes more of a purple. Well, you can't really see it very well, but it is more purple than if I drag it all the way to this side where it's more green. So if we look at her shirt here, all we're really doing is trying to match these colours. So I am in fact going to just drag that up to about +13. The aquas, I'll probably drop that down to -33. It's not really adjusting the shirt too much, which is a little bit annoying. We'll have to do that with a brush tool later. Then with the purples and magentas, we're really not going to get any change. So we're going to leave those there. Okay, if we come back down here to the luminance slider, we can really then adjust the brightness of each colour. Now, on Kim Kardashian's page, everything is incredibly bright, and if it's not, what they've done is they've focused on the parts of the image that are important. So if I try and find an example, here, being an example, obviously this photo was taken at night with flash, so she's already illuminated, but you can see that these colours are brighter. We want to get the luminance slider and we want to drop down the reds and also the oranges ever so slightly. Not too much, just enough that the skin looks a little bit darker. We're going to get the yellows and we're going to brighten up the yellows to +39, and we're going to get the greens and we're going to brighten up the greens as well to +20. As for the aquas, we're going to drop the aquas a bit. We're also going to drop the blues as well. Make sure that it's not too bright on the shirt. And that's probably enough right now for the HSL slider. So if I close that up, you can see the difference it makes when I turn that off and when I turn it back on again. The difference that makes to the overall image. So if I press the backslash key, you can see the before. If I press it again, you can then see the after. At this point, I think it's probably a good point to mention that obviously, we're not going to get the exact same thing, but you can see if I were to have this image next to this image, they would fit a very similar theme. You've got these desaturated bluey turquoises that you've got going on in the sky, and then like the oranges in the bottom. So it's not quite a teal and orange colour grade, but it is principally kind of the same idea. So we're actually now going to have a look at this photo, and you can see if I then go back onto here, we are beginning to get there. Now this photo is slightly more purpley blue than this one, but obviously all of them are going to be slightly different. Next thing is split toning. Now split toning will introduce a colour into your highlights and also a colour into your shadows, and you can adjust the balance between the two and also the saturation of each colour. In this case, with the highlights, we want to probably add about a number which is 144, which is more of a blue colour. If you press Alt or Option on your keyboard and slide the slider along, you can see what colour you are applying to the highlights. So if we click on 144 and I just put the saturation on about 5, it's very hard to see the difference. If I shove it all the way up, you can see we are introducing sort of tealy turquoisey blues there. So if we turn the split toning off and on again, you can see ever so slightly it changes the highlights. Now we don't really want to mess around too much with the split toning sliders because you can very much overdo your image. Now a lot of Kim Kardashian's photos are that vintage look. You can see here the colours I'm trying to get is more of a turquoisey purpley blue. So if we drag the shadow slider up to 271, and we are literally just going to put the saturation on about 4. We don't want it to be too overbearing. So if I turn that off and on again, ever so slightly changes those colours. Okay, now one thing I want to mention is on a lot of her photos, she's going for a very vintage look. Now this one really demonstrates that quite well. She's got a massive amount of fade in the highlights and shadows. You can see the hair in the shadows is very sort of grey, faded out. She's also added grain to her photos as well. So if I come back onto here, that's where we're going to do that now. We're going to come to Effect, and we're going to drag the grain slider up, and we're going to put that on 58%. You can always adjust this. This will depend on your image. You may find you want more, you may find you want less. You can also then increase the size of the grain to 50% as well. Actually, that looks a little bit too much grain. I'm going to drop that down to about 40. So if I turn that off, then turn it on again, that's what we're beginning to get to look like now. It's possibly a bit hard to see. If I just zoom in, you can see what we're looking at now with the grain, how that's beginning to look, if that ever loads. So you can see the grain is being added to the image fairly nicely. So we're almost getting there with our vintage feel to the image. Okay, so if we come back to this photo, we are gradually getting there. Obviously our greens are more desaturated, but we're going off a few images here. We're trying to balance it as well as we can. Okay, now you can come into detail and you can add a little bit of noise reduction, because obviously if your photo was too dark and you've done too much color grading, you are going to lose some of the detail in the image. So you may want to bring up a bit of noise reduction to flatten that image. And also in a lot of her photos, you can see they are very flat. This isn't the best example, if I'm being honest. A lot of her photos are incredibly smooth. Okay, so moving on, we are basically almost done. We can come down to camera calibration and we can possibly adjust the colours a bit more. Now, if we come onto camera calibration, all this does is this will adjust our colours a slight bit more. So come onto blue primary and we're going to bring that up to +5. And to be honest, we're probably just going to leave that there. We're not going to do too much because we can incredibly overdo the image. So turn that off and on again, you can't really see much difference. In any respect, we are basically done. Now, obviously, because in a lot of her photos, you can see here, this one, for example, has got an awful lot of fade. It's also got a bit of a vignette around the edges. So we're going to add some vignette to our photo. If we come to effects, we can do highlight post-crop vignetting. So we can just basically drag down the amount to, we're going to drag it down quite a way, maybe not that too far, maybe -35. We're then going to drag the feathering up quite a lot, possibly to 100. I usually drag the feathering up a lot so it doesn't look too obvious that we've got a vignette on there. Obviously in this case it is quite obvious, but we don't want it to be a harsh solid line in the circle. Now you can mess around with things like roundness just to adjust the way the vignette falls on the photo. I'm just going to leave that at 0. And I think we're possibly done there with the vignette. I don't want to mess around with that too much. If I turn this off, we're going to get rid of the grain and also the vignette, but you can see the difference it makes when it's turned on. Finally, I want to come back onto the tone curve, and I'm actually going to add some more fade into the shadows. Having looked at some more of her photos, we can see that the fade is a lot more extreme in a lot of the photos. So just drag that up to there, and if you also drag it out to the right a bit as well, you can also adjust the fade a little bit more. Okay, so that's possibly the image done now. If I press the / key, you can see before and also the after. Obviously this photo isn't identical, but if we do choose one of her photos where she's got the color scheme that we're going for, say for example this one, you can see we've matched the color of her top and also the color you're kind of getting very much to this image here. Now, one thing I will say is you can also increase the fade a lot more, because if you really, she does like her fade. You can see here in the background the fade is incredibly a large amount. So I've just increased the fade quite a bit. We've faded off the bottom, and that is the look we have managed to achieve with this color grade. Now, one thing I will say to you guys is once you've done that, you want to come over to your presets and you want to just click that plus button, and then you probably want to save the preset as something like Kim Kardashian, and you want to save that under possibly a new folder. I'm also going to call that Kim Kardashian. And all that means is now, once you've done this, if you've ever got a photo you want to apply this theme to, all you need to do is come down to presets and then click on Kim Kardashian, and it will apply that preset to your image. Okay, so that's it for this video today, guys. I really do hope that that was useful to some of you, and even if this isn't identical to Kim Kardashian's page, you can see how you can incorporate her style into a new theme. So you could also use this preset to create a travel photography theme. In fact, I quite like the colors we're getting from this, so I may even start to use this on my account. Like I said at the beginning of the video, I would love to get to know you guys a lot more on our channel. We want to try and bridge the gap between us and you. We want to try and get to know you guys, so we really would like to do that through Twitter. If you guys go follow us over there, we can start to have conversations on Twitter. We can start to talk and get to know each other. I really feel like it'd be quite a fun way of moving this channel forward. If you have any ideas on how we could also do that with videos and make it more interesting for you guys, let us know in the comments. But in the meantime, we will see you in the next video. Live long and prosper.